Geek. Talking baseball every week. 'Cause the Gleeman and the Geek.
And welcome to Gleeman and the Geek, presented by Black Stack Brewing. They are now in a liquor store near you. I'm John Bonus, Vince Daly with me here in Gleeman and the Geek.
This is the last one of these.
Before the trade deadline.
Yeah. So we got a lot to cover. A lot of it is theoretical.
I mean, it's also been a big week. It has been a big week. I mean, between the Brewers series and the Philly series and all the injuries that we didn't know were happening last Friday, and now all the injuries that, are ending this Friday.
Yeah.
Hopefully. we got
plenty of
we
talk.
got stuff has been. Oh, and a TV contract that might be coming back too.
Yeah, we got plenty to talk about. Not that we're ever really short of stuff to talk about.
That's right.
We can vamp with the best of them.
We'll try to cover as much as we can, but we just remind you that we've covered a lot of this stuff in detail, including a lot of trade deadline stuff in the last podcast. We had almost 2 hours, part of which, first half hour, 45 minutes was about that Phillies series.
And a few minutes of cat
series.
talk. Don't forget that.
Had some cat talk. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and we should note, for this upcoming week now, trade deadline week, which is Tuesday, 5 o'clock our time.
Right.
I've actually figured that out, as opposed to just we kept guessing what the deadline was. We should say that there will not be a free episode next Friday.
Yeah. I'm
as
out of town.
a trade deadline recap.
I'm going to be in Portland, Maine. So.
However, we're going to be doing a Patreon Monday morning, upcoming Monday morning, as our sort of last trade deadline preview. And also we'll talk about the weekend series against the Tigers.
Right.
And then we're going to be, first of all, if they make a trade like Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, whatever, we will do an emergency episode on the Patreon for exclusively per Patreon subscribers. And then whether or not they make moves, we will be doing a Wednesday morning, bright and early, the morning after the trade deadline recap. Reactions to that.
What did they do? What did they not do? What did other teams do, etc. So
those are all going to be probably 90-plus minutes of commercial-free Twins talk
for $1 each.
For $1 each,
right?
Drop at any time. You just go to Patreon, Patreon, Patreon.com/Gleeman. We would love to have you join us for the trade deadline because win, lose, or draw. It'll be interesting.
Yes, it will be.
I mean, if they make a move, it's interesting. If they don't, that's in itself kind of interesting.
We've actually had the first, I think, basically kind of the first trade deadline trade.
2 last night.
Oh really? What was it? I knew there was a arena one.
AJ Puck, the reliever, left-handed reliever, got traded.
I missed that one.
From the Marlins to the Diamondbacks.
Okay.
And Randy Arozarena late last night got traded. It's interesting from Tampa Bay to Seattle. So I mean, it makes sense.
Tampa Bay is a half game behind Seattle in the wild card standings.
Yeah, but here's the thing with Rosarina and Tampa Bay, because when we did the top 50 for the Athletic, the top 50 players who could be moved, we had Rosarina 8th.
Yeah,
and I wrote the blurb for it because I did the American League players. There's a little behind the curtain for you. If you're going, man, the American League write-ups on this article are horse crap and the net. Well, sorry. And the thing I wrote is it might seem weird to trade in his prime, middle of the order guy who has 2 more seasons after this one of team control. But the thing you always have to figure out with the Rays, he's making 8-point-something million this year, and even though he had a bad start to the season, he's going to get a raise
12,
to $11 million next year, something like that. That's a lot for them. That's like 20-something million for a normal team, given their payroll. So I think that was part of it. But it makes sense for Seattle.
It's not clear that they would have traded him. I think they were going to trade him one way or the other, either this offseason or now. And if they got, although
when guys start to get expensive, we used to see this with the Twins more, and unfortunately, we may see that with the Twins again next season.
Kind of saw with Polanco.
No, I don't think they traded for. Well, first of all, Polanco's on Seattle. He's been so bad they had to go trade for Randy Arozarena to help the lineup. So Tuesday's the deadline. We will have at least 2 and possibly more shows for you around the deadline. But you got to go to Patreon.com/Gleeman to get it. So Twins take 2 or 3 from the Phillies. which was a pretty good showing considering how that series started. And John's real excited because he can talk smack to his Philadelphian wife, Chrissy. For another, what'd you calculate?
427 days.
Yeah, because they don't play him again.
They don't play him until the last weekend of 2025.
Right. Yeah.
Unless we meet him in November.
Well, yeah. Then you're on your own. Then you're on your own for that one. Yeah, I told the social media team for the Twins. They sit right behind me in the press box.
Yeah.
And they did. Hey, Philadelphia is spelled with 2 L's. That was their tweet. And I guess a lot of Phillies fans were like, How dare you talk, about us? We've been more successful. And I said, it's kind of genius because the only time it'll matter this season is if it's in the World Series, in which case that'll be the last thing on anybody's mind.
That's
but
right.
Taking 2 out of 3 from the Phillies, who still, even after losing 2 out of 3, have the best record by a few games in Major League Baseball.
Right.
Not only did
and did that versus their top 3 pitchers.
Not only did they beat 3 all-star caliber pitchers, starting pitchers, plus a very good bullpen. The Twins did it down their 3 best hitters for the entire series, and using Stephen Oker and
3, 4, 5 pitchers
and David Festa in the third game, which worked out pretty damn well. Didn't look like it was going to in the first couple innings. They did a funny thing. So Stephen Oker opened, because he's a left-handed reliever, and the top of the Phillies lineup has Kyle Schwarber and Bryce Harper batting first and third, and they weren't going to change that, so they matched him up against lefties. Didn't work particularly well. He ended up facing 3 batters, didn't get out of the first inning, and then David Festa came in and got out of a jam, and then got himself into a jam in the second inning and wriggled out of that, and then pitched really well for a couple more innings.
That's right.
But post-game, the kind of rule or the standard operating procedure media-wise is that we have like a little press conference. There's a side room next to the clubhouse where we get Baldelli every game after the game, but also the starting pitcher for that day.
Right.
Well, Oker was technically the starting pitcher for that
right?
day. So we're sitting in there waiting, and Oker comes strolling in, and he goes, I bet you guys were thinking you'd see me. And then Festa comes strolling in, so they did it together.
Okay.
They were like a duo. It was like
that's similar to what they actually were at the game.
Yes, but it was funny, like Okert is...
Did Okert answer the first half of the first question? First third of the first question?
He answered the first question. I'll give him that. But it was a funny thing because then Festa at one point was like, yeah, it felt good to get out of that jam. And Okert looked at him like, because it was his jam. He was like, careful. But it was really good. And then at one point, Okert said, yeah, and this guy pitched pretty good. First he saved my ass, and then he saved his own ass. So I was like, okay, that's good.
That second inning was dicey.
Yeah. So that worked out well. I suspect, it's all dependent on trades, but that spot in the rotation will come up once more before the deadline, which is next Tuesday, July 30th. I suspect Festa has certainly earned another, we'll call it a quasi-start, whether it's a bulk situation like with an opener or just a straight-up start. We'll see.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what
He pitched well. I mean, I was impressed with him. First of all, that's a really good lineup to drop into and have to face. I mean, just the names in that lineup, and a lot of them are having great seasons, and it's the best team in baseball.
I mean, it's one of those sort of almost best lineups money can buy thing. Those guys have spent a lot of money on that. Yeah, on their top 5 hitters.
Festa, his previous start was terrible.
Right.
And actually his kind of last AAA start lasted, I think, an inning. He hadn't pitched in over 10 days just anywhere in a game. And so for him to drop in there, and I do think using the opener theoretically helped him in that he didn't have to face Schwarber and Harper to begin the game, but also then he had to come in and get out of a jam in the first inning, which is not great. But he made a good point. Like somebody asked him, how did you prepare for this differently than a start? And he said, well, I just acted like we were the road team.
Right.
Like, so, big deal. Like, I was just going to have to pitch the bottom of the inning instead of the top of the inning, and that's another 10 minutes. So I just delay my warm-up for 10 minutes. And he said that Baldelli had told him, or maybe Pete Mackey, the pitching coach, had told him before the game, here are the 2 scenarios. One is you come in the first inning to face the 4th batter if Okert has run into some trouble, which is what happened.
Yeah.
Or if Okert has a clean inning, you just start the second inning.
Right.
So he knew from a timing standpoint, like it wasn't going to be like we're really weighing this decision. Like it was a pretty clear point. So I was impressed with 7 strikeouts, a couple of walks, pitched out of 2 jams, one of which wasn't his own doing.
Yep.
It was certainly we had kind of talked about this regarding Festa because we were talking about my prospect rankings where I'm still pretty high on him. And it's like when you only have 2 starts to look at for a guy and they're both pretty bad or just not great.
Yes, right.
People are like, oh, this guy, maybe he's not
certainly
that good.
Different than we expected.
Right. And so when you introduce a 3rd start, which now increases the sample by 50%, and it's pretty good, then I think maybe people will calm down a little bit and give him a chance to actually, live up to the expectations. So we'll see. My guess is he'll make the next start, but again, they could make a trade. They could also, if they wanted to, send him down, call up like Louis Varland or Dobnik to make that start. But Baldelli seemed relatively impressed by Festa's outing. So we'll see. A couple other things.
It was also nice to see before we go past that game, after blowing the lead or the tie? The tie the night before, to see Duran come out the day game after it. Okay. All right. You are still
second item.
You are still talking about the game. All right.
We're completing each other's sentences. We're starting each other's sentences. But yeah, I agree. I mean,
27 pitches the night before.
11 strikes out of 27.
Yeah, right.
Well,
it comes in not only to preserve a tie in the 9th, but to face Schwarber, Trey Turner, and Bryce Harper.
1, 2, 3 in the line. And he looked good. We have seen from Baldelli, I think if we're making a list of sort of tendencies of Rocco Baldelli, I would put this on there and feel confident, which is when a relief pitcher blows up, they get right back on the horse. He's not a big believer in give this guy 3 days to think about it.
Right.
And so, so sometimes usage, like if he had pitched 3 days in a row, he wasn't going to pitch a 4th day in a row, obviously.
Right.
And he had thrown 27 pitches. But when I often turn to my right, Do Young Park of MLB.com with his bullpen spreadsheet, and we try to, in the 5th inning, go, how are they going to try to finish this game?
Right.
And we were both pretty certain we were going to see Duran, even though,
because Jackson Alcala had pitched 2 days in a row.
But,
or no.
He was really bad. They pitched 3 out of 4.
Yeah, right.
He was really bad the night before, and he had thrown almost 30 pitches.
Right.
So that's not typically a spot where you would use a guy, but I think Baldelli has proven, and maybe this is, again, a Pete Mackey thing also, that with relievers especially, he feels like, let's try to flush that one as soon as possible. And it can pay off, like we just saw, because now Duran is not sitting there thinking about the worst outing he's had.
That's right.
But it is risky in that if he does that again, then you have an actual problem.
Yeah. It also, we talked a little bit on Wednesday, right after the Tuesday game, about Duran almost looked too strong at some point. Like he also was having part of his wildness looked like he was almost having too much movement on his pitches, and I wondered if that their perception was the same way. Like his spin rates and stuff, I wasn't checking those out to see if they were above, beyond what he usually is, and he was just having trouble kind of controlling it at that point. So.
Yeah. A couple other things from that series of that game. Buxton got hit on the arm.
Yeah.
Came out of the game. Says he's fine. He was joking around afterward. He was going to his 1-year-old's birthday party afterward and all that. So I would have used that as an excuse not to go, but I probably would have been a worse father than him. What happened was similar to Correa a couple road trips ago.
The nerve.
His whole hand went numb.
Right.
And so if you were there, you noticed that. So the Phillies made a pitching change, which gave them like 5 more minutes. And during the entire pitching change, the commercial break and everything, Buxton just stood on first base with Baldelli and Masa Abe, the assistant trainer. And Masa was just, kind of massaging his arm, trying to. Right. Well, it turns out he just couldn't feel anything.
Right.
So they were doing stuff to his arm, and they'd say, like, how's that feel? And he goes, it feels fine because I literally can't feel anything. Because they were trying to figure out, is it broken?
Right.
And so that's similar to Correa. And then they went for x-rays, negative, came back negative. Right. And then an hour later when we go downstairs to talk to people, similar to Correa, everything's fine.
Yeah,
because the feeling comes back, and it's like, oh.
It looks terrible
like
in the moment because he's holding his arm like it's weird or like it's a detached piece of thing. Right?
Buxton's history is
right.
But imagine
Correa was the same way. Like
true.
It looks like that arm doesn't even belong to me anymore. Yeah. Right.
Imagine hitting your funny bone, but like 50 times.
With 100-mile-per-hour fastball.
You kind of get the feeling or lack of feeling with it. Right. And then the other thing from that game is Brock Stewart, as expected, came off the injured list, rejoined the bullpen.
Yes.
Looked pretty good, gave up a run.
Yes.
Pitched the 7th or something like that.
I think that's right.
I think they kind of scheduled it out. They didn't want him to be in a closer position because then they wanted to make sure he was going to pitch coming off the IL and make sure he could sort of get ready to come in at a certain point. But so that would be, he'll be watched carefully from a usage standpoint. I don't think you're going to see any back-to-backs from him, and we'll be watching, the velocity and all that. But even at mostly full health, Brock Stewart is one of their best pitchers and could make a big impact. But they got to keep him healthy now for the next 2+ months, which has proven to be a challenge. And then the other thing from that homestand is Carlos Santana had two huge, one homer and one double, near homer, one to right field and one to left center. And I looked up his numbers, and we've talked about this a fair amount over the last couple of months as he's sort of climbed into respectability numbers-wise. The first 20 games of the season, he hit 140 with no homers. And he's 38, so everyone was like, did they just get a guy who's cooked? Like, is that just...
Right.
Since then, he's played 76 games, so half a season, basically. 272 batting average, 358 on-base percentage, 506 slugging percentage, 14 homers. I think he's got almost 50 RBIs. Great defense at first base. Whole bunch of clutch hits. And
off of Aaron Nola, by the way.
Yeah. No, I mean,
who's also right-handed, which has also not been his strength.
Yeah, although the double was off a lefty.
Okay.
But the 2-run homer to tie it in game 2 of the series. No, game 1 of the series.
Game 1 of the series.
2 of the series? I don't know. I forget. Anyway, he's been huge. I mean, I think you could probably make an argument he's been one of their 5 most valuable players, which if you'd have told somebody that in April, they would have been like, what are you talking about? This guy was a million years old and looked like he couldn't hit anything. And now he's been fantastic for them. So that's kind of we'll give you a shorter than normal recap of that series. It was an interesting, first of all, homestand. They didn't play well against the Brewers, but they still could have and maybe should have won at least one and maybe both of those games. And
Target Field was fun those 2 nights, too.
I mean, they had, for the 5 games, 2 Brewers, 3 Phillies, they had like 173,000 fans or something like that. It was like 30+ every night or every game. You had the 141,000.
Yeah, you had a 41,000 on Saturday, I think. And I know it was over 30,000. I think it was almost 40,000 for the Sunday game. Yeah. It was over 30 for all of them.
It was fun. And, I mean, that's a big test. Those are definitely 2 of the top, 4 or 5 teams in the National League. Those are 2 of the teams that are as good or better than the Twins, where there's probably 6 or 8 of those. And there's been so much talk about their poor record against winning teams or teams projected to make the playoffs or teams better than them and all that. And Baldelli's been getting asked more and more about that by the media jackals. And I like Baldelli's answer, which is he hasn't made excuses for it. He basically says you can't not play well and beat these teams. Like the Milwaukee series was a perfect example.
Yes. Just too many mistakes.
It's not like Milwaukee was like brilliant, but you just can't. You can't be at 80% and beat these good teams. And so the Philly series was a nice bounce back there.
Yes.
To win 2 out of 3.
I mean, it looked like a lot of them in both Milwaukee series and with the Philly series. It's just a matter of getting a clutch hit at the right time or getting a runner in from third base with a 1 out. They seem to be kind of struggling with that.
But what happens is when you have a few games in a row, especially against good competition, where you go, 0 for 10 or 1 for 13 with runners in scoring position, people start to you forget everything that happened before and what might happen since after. It's just like, they can't. It becomes like a moral failing. It's like they can't come through in the clutch.
Sure.
It's like, well, no. Some games you do, some games you don't. Some games they get grouped together, some games they don't. So yeah, I thought it was a very enjoyable homestand. They could have and should have won 1 or 2 more games probably.
Sure.
But now what's interesting is.
But they also did that without their 3 best
right, which we're going to talk about. Hitters. They're going to have 2 of them back tonight, I think. And they go to Detroit. And then, who do they play right after Detroit? I'm blanking on it. Mets.
Yep.
2 teams that, the Mets are currently in playoff position.
Right.
But I would say 2 disappointing teams overall.
Sure.
Good, but not great teams, certainly.
Yeah.
Detroit's been playing a little bit better of late, but also, who knows, with all the trade deadline stuff going on with them. They're scheduled to face Skubal, I think, in the second game. We'll see if he's still there.
If he's still there.
And then they go White Sox, Cubs after that.
Right.
Well, those are two terrible teams.
Yeah.
Those are two selling teams for sure. So this is
all leading into a showdown with the Cleveland Guardians, 4 at home.
Including the doubleheader.
It'd be nice to whittle away that, 4.5 game lead they have right now to
Cleveland has
2.5 to 2.
Quite a few games lately.
Yeah,
They're not hitting. They're losing.
Yeah.
They've lost some to the Tigers. So, we don't really break down like individual games and stuff like that in terms of the upcoming schedule. But what we do kind of like to do is go, what's this next chunk of games look like?
Sure.
Like, what is this a hard chunk, an easy chunk? Is it a kind of back and forth? It's not an easy chunk because Detroit's still a decent team. The Mets, like I said, are in the playoff picture in the National League. But Detroit, Mets, White Sox, Cubs, as what is that, 12, 13 games or whatever it ends up being. You can make some hay there, particularly if Cleveland stumbles a little bit more. I mean, you want to try to get in position before that 4-game Cleveland series here, where if you go 3-1 or something, maybe you can tie them for first place or something. I mean, that would be, if you can get to within like 2 games before that over the next 2 weeks, that would be, with a doubleheader and 4 total games here, the environment for that could be a lot of fun.
It could be a lot of fun that weekend here.
So that's what I'm hoping for. And then the last thing, I don't have a whole lot of information about this, but it does sound like multiple reports, and then Dave St. Peter talked about it a little bit just casually the other day. Comcast and Diamond, which is Bally, are reportedly close to finally coming to some sort of agreement here where the Twins and teams like them in their position would be back on Comcast for the, presumably this agreement would be at least for the next 2 months. That's really what all we care about from that context. So I don't know if close means it's going to happen today or it's going to happen 2 weeks from now, but there are at least some reported progress, which there hasn't been for really, what's it been now? 2 months, 3 months? Maybe
it was the
over
beginning
2 months
of May, right?
Yeah. It's over almost 3 months.
3 months.
So that mess maybe will be coming to an end. Before we get to the injury updates, of which there are a lot and some good ones.
Yes, some good news for
let's talk about Blackstack a little bit more. You heard that they are kind of our presenting sponsor now for the entire show.
That's right. You can thank them for this episode.
Yeah, we would encourage you to support them just in general, but also
it's a lot easier to support them now because they are available in liquor stores everywhere. It used to be you could get. I mean, these guys make really good beers. Like they're known for, they're especially known for some of their IPAs, but they've also got a good Pilsner, some good sours. We can talk about those in a second.
You can actually get them in a
store. Now it's not just at the specialty beer, the beer stores that sort of specialize in really good beers. It is in fact all over. It's available all over from Grand Marais to Rochester to Winona to Fargo. You're going to find your favorites, including like the local 755 New England IPA is probably there. I actually had somebody at Target Field stopped me to talk to me about doing the local 755 the other day because it's good. But they've also got their Slopes French Pilsner, their Pull Tabs Pale Ale. You wanted to talk about which hops they use in that one.
And if you want to know where you can actually buy these,
yes,
just go to the Blackstack Brewing or Blackstack Beer website, and there's a page just says where to buy, and it'll list all their new locations, and they're adding all the time to that.
Yeah, and not to mention, you can also just stop by their tap room. Yeah. Their tap room is the second largest tap room in the state of Minnesota. It's right near 94 and 280. It's a fantastic place. I've gotten calls from various other media members saying, hey, come join me at the Blackstack Brewery because the beers here are so good.
John is just, people just come up to John and talk about beer now.
They do. It's great. Yeah, it's good. It's fun.
Okay, yeah.
So stop by there. They've also got all kinds of activities and stuff at their tap room. So stop by Blackstack Brewing near 94 and 280, or even easier, ask for them at your local liquor store, Blackstack Brewing.
Our next sponsor is Harry's Razors, longtime sponsor. And basically the way Harry's works is they cut out the middleman with razors.
Yes.
So that you don't have to go to a store and, track down some annoyed person and have them open a case for you. And what ends up happening then is it's such a hassle to get new razors that you stick with your old worn down razors for too long and you're not getting a good shave or you're cutting yourself or whatever.
You're certainly not shaving against the grain, which is what I learned to do with Harry's razors. Instead,
Harry's is producing as good, or I would say better quality razors,
right.
But they're inexpensive relative to some
Turns
brands.
out razors real easy to ship.
Because they just send it right to your door.
That's
and
right.
if you need new ones, you just click a couple of buttons, or you can even set up like a monthly, quarterly, whatever you want to do. And if you want to just give them
Just a try.
a trial set.
Yeah. It's a $3 risk.
Yeah, for a $13 value trial set. And let's see,
You get
what
a
do
5-blade razor, a weighted handle, foaming shave gel, and a travel cover for just $3. You just go to harrys.com/Gleeman. You can get more performance out of your shave with Harry's. Just get started with a $13 trial set for just $3. All that stuff we talked about at harrys.com/Gleeman. That's harrys.com/Gleeman for a $3 trial set.
Okay. Injuries. For once, these are not all negative.
6 days ago, they were all negative.
Yeah. They may be negative again soon. Who knows? But
7 days ago, we were speculating on what the injuries might be or might not be. 6 days ago, they're every bit as bad as we thought they were going to be, or maybe even worse. And now we've got some good news.
It's not all good, but I got enough good
okay.
to tell you about. So, I believe, barring something unforeseen in the next 6 hours, both Royce Lewis and Jose Miranda are expected to be back in the Twins lineup for this series in Detroit. They both rehabbed briefly with the Saints in St. Paul. Lewis played, I think they both played 2 games. They didn't.
Yeah, that's right.
I would expect Lewis to resume playing third, although I do think they're going to play him. I mean, I guess we saw this already, but quite a bit at DH also, especially early on. When he plays DH, then I would expect to see maybe Miranda at third base. Although they do have some other options there. So bringing both those guys back, Correa is still out indefinitely, I guess, although they continue to be pretty optimistic. He's walking around with his boot on to avoid any additional damage on the foot, but he seemed relatively optimistic that this is, kind of how they initially speculated that it would be a 1 or 2 weeks instead of 3 or 4 or more than that. So we'll see. He could potentially be back right after the trade deadline, which would be pretty big. Like we said, they've been playing without their 3 best hitters. Well, now you're getting 2 out of the 3 back, and the third one in Correa is hopefully relatively close to coming back. Now, what he looks like when he does come back is a whole other issue, because if he comes back from the plantar fasciitis and it affects him as much as it did last year, then you're still missing one of your best players, basically.
That's right.
But the moves, I only know one of the moves for certain, because they have to send 2 guys have to leave the roster to bring back Miranda and Lewis. One of them will be Jair Camargo, who's been the third catcher for a couple weeks now.
Right.
That's the easy one. The more difficult one, I mean, it could be Austin Martin, who hasn't been playing all that much this second time around, and who made a bad play in his lone action at second base, has been mostly playing the outfield, is sort of superfluous a little bit with Manny Margot in terms of role.
Right.
It could also just be Julian,
Right.
who was kind of only called back up from AAA, not because of his own performance, but because they just needed an infielder because of all these injuries. And he continues to watch a very frustrating number of called third strikes. Like he just,
Yep.
approach-wise, discouraging, I would say. You don't want to take away a guy's plate discipline. I mean, that's one of his biggest skills.
Yes.
And just in general, that's a great skill to have for a young hitter. But it's gone from, patience to passivity.
Yeah.
And he's just getting in spots where as soon as there's 2 strikes, they're just throwing him a breaking ball in the zone, and he just watches it and goes back to the dugout, and it's like what they want from him is not for him to turn into, Eddie Rosario or something like that.
Right.
Or Luis Ariz or anything. Like, he's always going to be a guy who strikes out because he goes deep in counts. He draws walks. But you got to be a hitter. You can't just be a walker.
Right.
Because Major League pitchers aren't stupid, and they're talented. And if they determine that you're just up there trying to walk, they're going to throw strikes.
When we talked to him for the
Discouraging.
first time, really talked to him, like spring training 2 years ago, he talked about what the difference that he made, or what helped him take off, was learning to be aggressive and ready to hit on those especially on the first couple pitches.
Well, yeah, but that's the thing,
right?
The first couple pitches hasn't been the problem.
Right.
He has been aggressive early in the count.
At the time, I was just like, that's interesting that he's one of the most patient guys in the organization, And what he thinks he needs to learn is be aggressive, be aggressive, be aggressive. Because usually, I mean, the cliche around baseball players is sort of like, oh, yeah, this guy expands the zone too much. Usually
but
the
here's
other
the
kind of
thing.
things, right?
When you're aggressive, they want you to be more patient. When you're ultra patient, they want you to be more aggressive.
That's right.
That's
right.
what it
That's
always
exactly
is.
right.
I mean,
That's exactly right.
he swings. He's far more aggressive early in counts, especially first pitch, which is fine. But he's gotta. I'm not even one of these guys who yells about protecting the plate. If it's not a
Yes,
strike, I
right.
don't want you protecting the plate. But he's just become. He's not putting up a fight enough, and a lot of these called strikes. Look, I looked up this stat the other day when he struck out, I think, 3 times looking in the same game.
Yes.
He spent 6 weeks at AAA.
Batting fifth, by the way, in that game, I think.
But I mean, they're without so many guys. He spent 6 weeks at AAA, and he now regained the lead in the American League with, I think he has now 40 looking strikeouts.
Yeah.
That's hard to do when you spend 6 weeks, a month and a half, and it's only the first half of the season, basically. And
Well, when they called him up, we said this isn't a necessary we're calling him up because he's ready to be back here kind of thing. It was they were calling him up because we got a hole in the second in your infield. We need some help.
Right, and he's on the 40-man roster.
Right.
So that's why when I'm trying to figure out who's going to get sent down, he's a possibility,
Yes.
certainly.
Yeah.
Because if you have Miranda and Lewis back, third base it can be handled, which opens up Brooks Lee to go back to second base, or it opens up Willie Castro to play other positions. Right. Although one of them is still needed at shortstop for however long Correa's out. I will note we had a discussion 2 episodes ago, maybe, about how without Correa, Baldelli had said that Castro was going to be the primary shortstop. And I said, that seems odd to me because they've been playing Brooks Lee at shortstop for his entire minor league career.
Game 3 of the Phillies series.
And Castro, I thought just in general, had a terrible series defensively at shortstop. He made a couple bad throws, which are...
I thought he looked bad at third base on the third day, too. A couple of in-between plays he got lost on.
There were 2 throws where anybody watching goes, well, that was a misplay. One of them, I think, was an error. But then there were also, in back-to-back games, nearly identical plays where instead of just charging a ball and making a bang-bang play and getting out, he sort of circled around the ball and then was a half step.
Yeah, he fields the ball fine. He ends up throwing it to first base. It's too late.
Right. And you look at that play, and you might not, just for the naked eye, you might go, he made a good play on it. What was he going to do?
Yeah, the ball was just too slow to him.
Right.
Yeah.
But if you watch the route he took to the ball, he kind of circled around it. It was the exact same play, basically. So what was interesting was that at the end of the homestand, Brooks Lee played shortstop, and Willie Castro played third base. The first ball that was hit to Brooks Lee then, and I think the only ball that he would have fielded, Willie Castro cut in front and threw the guy out at first base, which I thought was kind of interesting when you're swapping them back and forth. I think Baldelli's official explanation for that at the time was that he wants to, because Castro hasn't been hitting that great either since the break.
He's struggling.
Small sample. He wanted to get Castro back to moving around a little bit. Playing some outfield, playing some third, playing some second. But he saw the plays that we saw also, so maybe they said, well, maybe we're not that confident that Brooks Lee's a great shortstop, but maybe Willie Castro isn't a great shortstop either. So, we'll see what the lineup looks like for this Detroit series. But
I mean, the other reason that you would end up sending down Julian is that you want Julian playing every day.
Sure.
And given the fact that right now you're juggling a couple guys at third base, you got Castro in the lineup, you've got Brooks Lee. It's not that you can't find room for Julian. It's not like you can't give other people a break, but maybe just have everybody play where they want to play.
Here's another
play every day
option. To be option,
Brooks Lee. Yeah.
Now, if he's needed at shortstop, obviously you can't option him. So that depends on Castro. And actually, even if Castro is the shortstop, you're going to want somebody on the roster who can be a backup shortstop.
Sure.
Now, Royce Lewis has played shortstop, but the last thing they want to do right now is play Royce Lewis out of position at shortstop. So I suspect Brooks Lee is not really in the conversation for the send down now. I bet really realistically, and maybe I'll be wrong, he's essentially got until Correa is ready to sort of show that he belongs.
Could be.
Because he's really struggled. Not defensively, but offensively.
Defensively he's been good. And, I mean, he's He's down to, 236, 240 hitting right now.
He's got the problem, and this isn't necessarily a problem.
He's just not hitting for power. He's getting some hits. He's just not hitting for power.
Right. I mean, he's having trouble getting the ball to the infield sometimes. So he's got a little bit of the thing that when Miranda is not playing well, one of the things we talk about with Miranda is his ability to make contact is great in general, but it also doesn't give him a chance to kind of get, hitters' pitches as much, because any swing puts the ball in play.
Right.
So you have to be much more discerning, whereas like Joey Gallo or Miguel Sano or Matt Wallner, let's say,
sure,
they just swing away because half their swings are swings and misses. It doesn't end the at-bat. Well, almost every swing Brooks Lee takes ends the at-bat because the ball gets put in play.
Yeah.
And so particularly against fastballs and I think balls down in the zone, which is where he's being pitched a lot, I mean, he hasn't hit fastballs at all, really. I mean, I think all of his hits, good hits, have come against off-speed, which is interesting because you usually, especially for rookies, it's the opposite. Yeah. But you look at his swing and miss rate and his strikeout rate, he's not swinging and missing at anything. And that's great as an overall skill, a foundation to build on. But if you have that skill, you have to be a little more discerning about your swings, because your swings, that ends it. And so I think so much of his contact has just been weak, squibbed, chopped, and maybe he's just having a bad stretch, obviously. But it's something to watch with him. I think he's had a relatively discerning eye, but not ultra patient. And there's been some spots where he's swung at,
He's definitely drawn a couple more walks this last week.
Yeah, he's not been impatient or anything, but I think especially on fastballs, I think there's just some okay but not crushable fastballs. And he's like, I'll take a hack at it, and then he just chops it. But defensively, he's looked phenomenal. It's funny that depending on what game he plays or what position he plays the night before, everyone goes, well, he's got to stay at that position.
Well, that's true. Yes.
It's like he's been making great plays at third. And then you watch him at second, and you go, oh, he's been making great plays at second. Maybe he plays it. So I'll be curious to see what that setup is, although if he's just playing shortstop, we won't learn all that much. I'd like to see him get some balls at shortstop, because my impression from just talking to people who watched him at AAA and coming up through the minors is he's an okay shortstop. Like he's especially early in his career, but it's possible the Twins don't hold that view if they're putting Willie Castro there.
They certainly played him at shortstop. I mean, in the minors as well. We saw him play a lot of shortstop in spring trainings as well. Like he's just
that'll be something to watch.
So
I would, it's going to be Camargo. The second one, I would probably make it Martin, because he's just not playing that much. Although the thing about Martin is he can play the outfield,
right?
Which if you're bringing back Lewis and Miranda, you need less infield and more outfield.
I think I'd make it
Julian, right? Yeah. Which I have no problem with that either.
I mean, Martin is. I think Martin is going to be a part-time player. I don't feel as desperately like Martin needs full-time at bats.
But he even as a part-time player.
No, I agree. I mean, Margot. He's just so redundant with Margot right now.
It could be Wallner theoretically.
Yeah,
but here's what Wallner has done since returning from the minors, where everyone got so worked up about 25 horrible at bats to start the season. He's hitting .355 with a 1,200 OPS, a .742 slugging percentage. That's like in 12 games or something. Hitting for power, drawing some walks, throwing guys out from the outfield, coming through with some just moonshot homers.
Yes,
still striking out a bit. That's going to be par for the course. The really funny,
they definitely start to working him inside again, which is one of the things they kind of discovered.
The funniest part, though, is I looked at his overall numbers after that 1 for 18 with 13 strikeouts start that got him sent to the minors. He's got a higher OPS now overall for the season than last year.
Yeah,
when he had the second highest OPS on the team. I think now it's like the fourth highest OPS on the team. So that's it's quite a bounce back. Again, small sample, but yeah, I don't think they're going to send him down. Although if Lewis needs DH time, it's going to be hard against righties to play Kepler, Larnach, and Wallner at the same time. But we'll see. Let's see. A couple other things on the injury front.
Yeah, you could have Lewis at third, Miranda at first. Santana sits out a little bit.
Which Santana's worst side is against righties.
We just talked about how good he's been, though, too.
But not against not as a lefty.
Yeah, no,
he's had some hits. But
yes.
A couple other things on the injury front. Assuming both those guys return tonight or during this Detroit series, which is expected, the put this in quotes only, hitters that they'll be down now are Correa,
Right.
Kirilloff,
Yeah.
who's been working out at first base during this homestand.
Okay.
Pregame, and Kyle Farmer,
Yeah.
who, by the way, was stuck in I forget where he said Panama City or something like that
Right.
during because he couldn't get a flight back.
Yes.
He ended up getting a private jet situation going to get back. I don't know, but he's on the IL with a shoulder problem. So, that's obviously Correa is their best player. So I'm not discounting the impact of being without Correa.
Right.
But number one, that's hopefully ending relatively soon. I mean, I think certainly by early August he's hoping to be back. And number two, no offense to Farmer or Kirilloff,
Right.
but you can go on living without the two of them at this stage.
Yeah.
Certainly. They're pretty good shape here lineup-wise. So what you would like to see, particularly with now the upcoming schedule that we talked about, is get back into the spot you were in at various points over the last 2 months where you're putting up 5-6 runs pretty consistently, and hopefully, you still got Festa in a rotation spot. The rotation isn't exactly, it's been shown some signs of being better, but it's not exactly thriving. Hopefully now the offense, now that they're, mostly healthy, can start to carry some things a little bit.
4 of the 5 starts we saw coming out of the All-Star break were absolutely
Yes, you're right.
fantastic.
You're right.
The starters really
They're definitely
seem to be trending upwards
Yes,
in a good
for
way
sure.
here.
And
Hey,
then-
real quick, before you move off from Farmer and Kirilloff, we don't have dates on
No.
any text. I'm specifically wondering about Kirilloff.
I don't think you're going to see Kirilloff soon,
I
if
don't.
at all.
Well, I wonder if
I
they can get by without using his option this year. If they keep him on until, say, rosters expand or something, he's on the IL or he's doing a rehab assignment until rosters expand in September. They don't have to use the option, and then they get to carry it into next year.
But here's the thing. I know what you're saying. Like, you want to maintain the flexibility of being able to send him to the minors next year. But if you're in a spot next year where you're sending him to the minors, that's going to be it.
Well, yeah,
you know what I mean?
Probably, yeah.
So I think at that point, he's in his 5th year at that point. He's 28.
You just get to figure it out by May or June as opposed to by March 15th, March 20th.
Yeah, but he's going to make multiple millions of dollars.
He's definitely
next year.
second year of arbitration,
So
right? So he's
given their
make it $2.5-3 million.
situation, they're not going to give him that money and send him to the minors,
Yeah.
like as a plan. I mean,
Right.
So yeah, that's interesting. Maybe I'll be wrong. I mean, I'd love to see a healthy Kirilloff join this lineup, but I don't know where.
I'd love to see a healthy Kirilloff, period.
Well, right.
Right.
The last injury thing is Justin Topa. Who's
right.
yet to throw a pitch for the Twins. Made one rehab appearance in Fort Myers, and now I believe got checked out. It's a knee injury with him since spring training. Sounds like he's going to join the Saints for a rehab stint.
But it sounded like the reason he made his rehab start in Fort Myers was because he was stuck in Fort Myers.
Yeah.
You
can't go anywhere. I mean,
the planes were not flying.
They had trouble getting guys. Ronnie Henriquez was briefly on the roster for 2 days, and he showed up, I think, like in the 8th inning of the game because he was coming from Toledo, and they just couldn't get a flight from Toledo.
Right.
They were talking about sending a car for him and just driving him from Toledo or something like that. Anyway, the airport situation, especially, I guess, Delta. But Justin Topa, I think the feeling with Topa, he's opted for the rest and rehab versus knee surgery.
Right.
Because the idea is if he needs knee surgery, it's like a 2 or 3 month thing. Having it in March versus July or August won't matter in terms of next spring.
Right.
Whereas putting it off and trying to rest and rehab
Might make
gives
a
you
difference
some
this
chance
time. Yeah.
to contribute down the stretch. Because of that, as like an approach with the injury, I do think they're going to not rush him, but be pretty aggressive with getting him back to the majors because I think they kind of figure we don't want to use up bullets here in the minors. Like if this guy's got 10 appearances in him before his knee gives out, let's make those appearances in the majors. Now, that would be a great addition to the bullpen.
Yes.
Along with Stewart and some other. But I
just don't know.
I don't know how anyone could have any sort of confidence, good or bad, in predicting how Justin Topa will look or if he'll get back there at all, basically. But theoretically, when they acquired him, he was, secondary setup man, 7th inning type of guy. He was really good for the Mariners in a, setup role, pretty high leverage last season. So that would be big. Before we get into some trade deadline
Let's talk about a couple more
Speculation.
sponsors. Dan Hodgen. Dan Hodgen, you get the best of both worlds as a real estate consultant with eXp Realty here in the Twin Cities. First of all, you get 5-star service. 5-star service since 2001. You get all that experience that he's got in the market and all the stuff that you need from a real estate agent, whether it's figuring out your goals or searching for properties or evaluating the market value of your property, all the negotiation and stuff that you go through in the purchase process. But also, he doesn't scalp you for it.
Yeah.
What separates him from, I think, a lot of other real estate agents is he just lists properties for a $6,000 flat fee. That's, a traditional commission structure would charge, 3.3% on the list side.
So for a $400,000 house, let's say, his flat fee of $6,000 essentially saves you $6,000.
Yeah, that's
or
right.
a little bit more than that, actually.
That's right.
Half price, kind of.
He also doesn't charge a broker admission commission to buyers or sellers. That can save you another $500 to $1,000. And above all, he urged you don't take someone else's guaranteed, usually lowball piece. Like when you get those guaranteed things, like, I don't want the hassle.
You want an actual guy who's going to pay attention to what's going on.
Get paid. Make sure you get paid. Make sure you've got somebody on your side, and make sure they're not scalping you themselves, which is all he does, right?
You can go and check out Dan at twins6k.com, like the number 6 and K. And the reason it's twins6k, it's twins, as in the team you care about.
Yeah.
And 6K, as in his flat fee.
Yes. And that link will take you to his website.
Yes, twins6k.com, and that's Dan Hodgen helping you from start to finish.
And here is his jingle.
Call Dan Hodgen, he's your man. Sell your lodging for just $6,000. From western Wisconsin to the Twin Cities land. At twin6k.com, find Double N Dan. He'll give you his all for just $6,000. To find your dream home or sell yours today. Use your noggin, find Dan Hodgen at twin6k.com.
Dan Hodgen jingle, courtesy of Stuart Rose.
Assuming you actually put it in.
Yeah, I make sure I put it in this time.
Our next sponsor is the Game Time app, and when the Twins are back home here, they got a series against the White Sox coming up.
Yeah,
and then we talked about the Cleveland series coming up in a couple weeks.
Two weekend series coming up.
You're going to want to go to those games. The easiest and best way to do it is by using the Game Time app. They specialize in hard-to-find tickets, but also last-minute tickets for not only games, but shows, concerts, stuff like that. And the beauty of it is it's all an app. Right. So you can, as you're walking to Target Field, from the parking ramp or the bar stool you're on, whatever it is, on your walk to the gate, punch up the Game Time app. You can sort by value, which is an interesting thing they do, which they basically say, what's your price point? And they'll say, here's the best sections or the best tickets available.
You can toggle on a little thing that shows you what all the prices are with the fees and such included. So you're not surprised. There's no bait and switch at the end of it,
And if you use the Game Time app, take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets with Game Time. You download the app, you create an account, you use the code Gleeman, you get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply, but just create an account on the Game Time app, redeem the code GLEEMAN. You get $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets. Lowest price. Guaranteed. Okay. Let's talk a little trade, though. So, Tuesday, 5 o'clock.
So, I didn't understand. I was wondering why it's on the 30th this year as opposed to the 31st when it traditionally is. Last year, I'd forgotten that it was actually August 1st. Yeah. And the deal is that in the new collective bargaining agreement, it's no longer specified as the 31st. It's now the commissioner gets to decide when it is going to be. And it can be anytime between like the 28th or the 3rd or something like that. And it feels like, since this is the third year in a row where it's ended up falling on a Tuesday afternoon, they've just decided we're going to have it on Tuesday afternoons. That's when
it was
deadline
August
is going to
something
be.
A couple years ago.
It was August 1st last year.
Yeah, last year.
Right. And, Tuesday afternoon makes some sense given the fact that I think there are still some teams who are like waiting to see how the games go this weekend to see whether they are in or out. Then that gives them, 36 hours or 48 hours probably from the end of Sunday's games. Sunday's games are mostly done by 5 o'clock on Sunday. We've got that time to we got 48 hours now to figure out which way we're going to pivot on this stuff. And I do think one of the things that we've seen is a little more stratification in terms of which teams are probably in or probably out, at least in the National League we have.
Well, It's very hard to find clear-cut sellers this year. It's been that way since now they
Sure.
expanded the playoff, because now the third wild card means that if you're essentially anywhere near 500, even 2/3 the way through the season, you're within. You can talk yourself into buying or at least not selling,
Right.
because of the third wild card. I mean, we said the Mets
Yeah.
have had a very disappointing season. They're currently holding the third wild card.
Yeah, they went on a little bit of a win streak
all it
towards
takes.
the end of June or something, and suddenly they are
2 good weeks and you're in the playoff picture. And
That's
so
right.
what that happened, I mean, probably
and this affects the Twins too. When you talk about the Rangers, the Rangers are also kind of
Yeah, the Rangers are 3 games below 500, but they're only a few games back of a
Right.
playoff spot.
That's right.
And so
Yeah.
it's like, are they going to sell? Well, I can tell you that I worked with our Mets beat writer Tim Britton, I guess it was Monday, to put together this big board for the Athletic of the top 50 players who could be on the move. And our big struggle was, what teams are even selling guys?
Right.
Are you
That's
including
right.
Mets?
Yeah.
Are you
Right.
including Rays? Are you including Rangers? And we were, I guess I would say, liberal with our choices. We leaned more towards, if this team could sell, we'll include them. But we talked a lot on the Patreon show 2 days ago. We spent like an hour talking about starting pitching candidates
Yes.
for the Twins, rentals basically. And 2 of the more prominent ones
are the Rangers.
are, well, 3 Rangers, but 2, Max Scherzer
well,
and Nathan Eovaldi.
Right.
And Michael Lorenzen was another one too that
Right.
we
Yeah, that's
mentioned
right.
briefly.
Yes, that's
but
right.
the Rangers aren't selling now. There was a report last night or this morning from Ken Rosenthal that said, yeah, they're like 4 games back.
Yeah.
They just hung a banner. They're going to go for it.
Yeah, and I mean, given what happened this week is the Rangers went on a 5-game win streak,
Right. That's all
and
it
the
takes.
Mariners went on a 3-game losing streak. And as a result, they're still 4.5, 5 games out of the wild card. The Rangers are, but they're only 2.5 games or 2 games, something like that, out of the divisional lead.
So, it's fun. Like, there are realistically, I think, like 6 or 7 teams, White Sox, Oakland, Miami, that sort of thing, where it's like, well, they've been done. They weren't expecting to do anything coming. Those are obvious sellers. But, of course, those teams are so bad that they have fewer players people would want. They don't have 0, but they have fewer. And then there's this whole just sort of 6 or 8 team middle ground where it's like they're basically 500. They're, like you said, some of them are in playoff position. Some are 3 or 4 games out of a playoff spot. Arizona, Texas are the 2 World Series teams. They're both in pretty much the same boat. But it's not shocking that they're incentivized to buy coming off a World Series run.
Of course.
And the Mets, same thing.
Right.
You look at like the Padres or something like that. I mean, most of these teams that were like on the fence, like logically at least from an outsider's perspective, I think are trending towards, if not buying, then at least not selling.
Right. That's right.
The only fence team really that like went now complete to sell mode because they've continued to fall apart is the Blue Jays, I would say.
Yeah. That's
And
right.
they do have a lot of good players, but they only really have one rental pitcher that would interest the Twins, which is Yusei Kikuchi, which we'll talk about him in a moment. But you start, you remove the two or three Rangers guys from this mix. You remove the Mets guys like Severino or somebody like that from the mix.
Yep.
And it's like there just isn't that much left from a rental standpoint. And the reason we're focusing, we won't spend as much time as we did on the Patreon side about this, but on rentals, I would say is threefold from my perspective. And it's not, nobody from the Twins has told me they're only looking at rentals, but I think you can sort of connect the dots here and suspect that they are for 3 reasons. 1, there's no gaping hole in next year's starting rotation.
Right.
All 5 of their guys, if you include Paddock, so Lopez, Ryan, Ober, Seaman Woods Richardson, and Paddock are all either signed to guaranteed deals with Lopez and Paddock or just under team control. Pretty
We've got no big
inexpensively.
free agents. We've got no Sonny Gray, Kenta Maeda leaving
Correct.
the rotation.
So you could just roll with those 5 guys. There's your rotation. And you also then have Louis Varland,
David Festa.
David Festa, Zebby Matthews, Andrew Morris,
Yeah.
Randy Dobnak, the minor league guys. So you could say we don't necessarily even need, in terms of adding a salaried component
Sure.
to next year.
Right.
The other thing is rentals cost less.
Yes.
Not just in terms of money, which we'll get to in a second, but in terms of prospect capital. If you're trying to trade for a rental, even a good rental, you're trading for roughly 10 starts. Now, if you're trading for a guy who's under control for next year as well, you're trading for 40 starts.
Yeah.
If you're trading for a guy who's got 2 years of team control, like Skubal, Crochet, the top guys on the market, that's 65 or 70 starts. Right. Well, obviously 10 starts, even if the guy's a better pitcher, is going to be a whole lot less of a price tag, a lower price tag, than 40 or 60 or 70 starts. Right. That's just logical. Right. And then the third reason, and this is the really frustrating reason, is they're not going to spend any money. I'm pretty confident of that. Now,
for 2025, we're specifically kind of parsing for.
I'm saying for both. But, a rental, you're essentially taking on 1/3 of their salary because right. 2/3 have already been paid by their current team. So a guy making $10 million, you're only really taking on about $3 million. Right. Now, I have skepticism regarding the Twins' willingness to take on even $3 million, as sad as that sounds, as pathetic as that sounds. I think it's possible that they will ask teams to eat some or all of that money, which will, of course, cause that team to say, yeah, we will, but you have to improve your offer. You have to give us a different prospect or a better prospect. But with guys making $15, $20 million, $5, $7 million you're taking on, I think there's very little chance of the Twins willingly taking that on. So that's a factor.
Sure.
But to your point, you look at someone like Tyler Anderson.
Sure.
Lefty for the Angels. Not a great pitcher, but a solid enough veteran mid-rotation starter. He's owed $13 million this year and $13 million next year. Well, that's the going rate for that type of pitcher. It's not an exorbitant amount. For this year, you got to take on about $4 million. Next year, he signed for $13 million. Now, there are some teams who might view that as a positive thing. The Twins 2 years ago might have viewed that as a positive thing. Oh, we can get this guy for the stretch run, and we can pencil him in as our fourth starter for only $13 million next year. The Twins do not have $13 million for next year unless something dramatically changes in terms of their revenue, attendance, television situation, ownership's viewpoint.
There's no obvious factor that is going to get them to increase their pay by
unfortunately
their payroll by $15-20 million.
If anything, I'm fearful that their payroll is going to decrease further next year because the television situation has got even messier, and attendance is several 100,000 people off from where they sort of, I would say, optimistically projected it. So that's revenue. That's lost.
And they may not necessarily be winning a couple of postseason games this year, like they did last year.
That's a self-fulfilling prophecy there.
That's right.
So those are the three reasons why we've tended to focus on rentals. It's not that it's impossible that they could go out and get a guy who's got team control beyond the next 2 months. And in fact, I'll maybe mention a couple that I think are kind of outside the box that I wouldn't mind seeing them pursue. But I would be surprised if that's... Now, they could get a guy who's team controlled cheaply, like arbitration eligible or something like that. Like Reed Detmers from the Angels is someone.
Fetty.
Well, Fetty's owed $7.5 million.
Yeah, but that's not that much.
They ain't taking on $7.5 million next year. They're over next year's payroll already.
I'm with you.
I would be all for...
I put out a story in March about how they're over
I would be all for
already.
Pursuing Fetty. In fact, in a normal circumstance, with an ownership that was willing to invest in its product, I think he would be an ideal target. He's a solid, number 3, maybe borderline number 2 starter.
$7.5 million.
He's owed only $2 million more this year, and $7 million for next year is so cheap and so inexpensive. But they have Paddock making $7.5 million. Somebody can aggregate this as they are. I believe if Paddock were healthy,
they would be trying to trade him
away.
They'd
be trying to trade Paddock right now,
maybe
from a monetary standpoint.
I believe that.
So. It sucks that this is a factor, that you can't just look at the list and say, who's the best option for them? What's the best sort of mix of upside and present value and cost and all that stuff? Because that's difficult enough to figure out at the trade deadline and not make a regrettable trade and bring in the right guy and all that stuff. But now where you're sitting there going, can they take on $3 million this year? Can they take on $7 million, let alone $10 million, $12 million, $15 million next year? It really stinks that's kind of looming over all of this decision making, because I think it compromises the front office's ability to just make straight up decisions. It's hard enough to win trades at the deadline.
Sure.
So talking a little bit about some specific names, again, we went an hour plus on this on the Patreon side, so you should join that. If you join now, you get the whole archive for free anyway. So I mean, the Paddock injury, I argued a few weeks ago or a couple weeks ago that even when Paddock was quote unquote healthy, I would be trying to pursue a veteran starter.
Sure.
Now that Paddock is back on the IL and they have no really way of knowing when or how good he would be when he comes back, I think you certainly need a veteran starter. You could theoretically just roll with Festa, Varland, Dobnik, Matthews. It's not the end of the world, but you also might need one of those guys if someone else gets hurt down the stretch. You don't want to be left, with Caleb Bosley starting for you for a month and a half or whatever it is. No offense to him, but well, some offense to him. I don't think he's a listener. So, if you're removing Eovaldi and Scherzer from the mix, and Lorenzen, presumably, they could move Lorenzen because they have DeGrom coming back.
Yeah.
And Tyler Maui they have rehabbing too. So maybe they might look to move Lorenzen.
The,
Not that I'm excited about Lorenzen.
The tricky part about the Rangers making this decision is they always kind of felt like they just need to keep their head above water for the first half of the year.
That was the plan.
That was the plan coming into the season.
They had a lot of old injured pitchers
that were coming back for the second half of the year. Right. So the fact that they are, a game or two under 500 and still within shot of the top of the AL West, of course they're going to stay in it.
So my number one option here, target for the Twins in terms of rentals hasn't changed. And I think it's obvious he's going to get traded, which is Jack Flaherty from the Tigers, who we've seen against the Twins relatively recently. He made what will probably be his last start, looked good. He had a brief IL stint, but he's come back with a couple of good starts since then. He's a guy who, when he was young with the Cardinals, was sort of a phenom, top prospect, had 3 really good seasons, then had a bunch of injuries, kind of, pitched his way out of the Cardinals' plans, signed a 1-year, $14 million deal with the Tigers, has been phenomenal. I mean, 1-year deal couldn't have worked out better, other than the Tigers just aren't as good as they hope to be, but that wasn't his doing. Like, he's been awesome.
Yes.
He's pitched at an all-star level. He's owed roughly $4-point-something million for the rest of the season. He is certainly a playoff caliber starter. I would argue he's as good or better than any starter the Twins have, at least as long as he's healthy right now. But and I do think the Tigers will sell because he's an impending free agent. I don't think they're going to give him $150 million for an extension.
Sure, right.
But the one complicating factor there, first of all, assuming they're willing to trade within the division, and assuming the Twins are willing to send a division rival some prospects, which could come back to haunt them, they can just make Flaherty in November the qualifying offer, and either keep him on a 1-year, $20 million deal, which they would love. Obviously, they gave him $14 million coming off an injury, or much more likely, he rejects that, he signs somewhere else, gets $100 million or whatever, and they get a late first-round pick for him. Right. So that means the bar to clear for any trade offer is at absolute minimum a late first-round pick, and you have to kind of add to that because you're taking 2 months.
You're also trying to give them why would they make that trade? Right. They'd rather have it for the next 2 months. Why not?
Even if there's a 1% chance of making the playoff. So he's the guy I would make calls on. The question there is, once the guy's traded mid-season, the qualifying offer is out the window. So the Twins would not recoup a first-round pick for him the same way that the Tigers would. So it's, what do you want to give up for 10 starts of a really good pitcher? Now, if he's brilliant in 10 starts and he pitches you to a division title
and you get
and he wins a couple of postseason games, well, then, you're willing to give up prospects. But if you get him and he's kind of mediocre for 2 months or he gets hurt, which he's been hurt quite a bit over the years, that's the risk involved. So I would still put him at the top of that list, clearly. I think Kikuchi, who we just mentioned, is sort of seemingly in their wheelhouse from a bunch of components. First of all, he's an impending free agent.
Yeah.
He's owed only $10 million this year, which means he's only owed like $3 million for the next 2 months. Toronto is absolutely selling, and certainly selling any free agents to be. Right. He's a lefty, which they don't have. I personally don't think that's that particularly that important, but it is a tiebreaker, let's say.
Sure.
And I think you can argue that he has more upside than his present performance has shown, although people have made that argument with him in past years too, and not always been right. But really good raw stuff. A lot of strikeouts, gives up some homers, but the kind of you take his skill sets and his strikeouts and stuff, and he looks like a 3-something ERA pitcher.
Yeah, that's right.
And he's almost always pitched like a 4-something ERA.
I wonder what his career xFIP is versus his career ERA.
Almost a runoff.
Yeah,
I mean, this year I think he has a 4.54 ERA, which is mediocre, And I think his xFIP and expected ERA are like low threes, like 330, 340.
And that seems to be kind of a consistent story with him.
So if you're the Twins and you think you can tap into that upside for the next 2 months, he could potentially be undervalued. I mean, I don't think they're going to be able to get like a top prospect for him or something. So I think that would make sense.
But it's not clear he makes the play. He makes a start in the postseason.
No,
if you
although
acquire him.
I wrote about this the other day. Like, I think their goal, I mean, obviously you'd like to add Flaherty or something like that and just check all boxes.
Sure.
But realistically or logically, I feel like their goal should be find someone who can definitely step into the fourth or fifth spot in the rotation, give you 10 solid starts, a veteran guy, and if those 10 starts are good, like if they get on a good run for them,
sure, then maybe
they can at least get themselves into the playoff discussion.
Sure. Right.
Like, you know, it's
right.
If he has a
Fair.
good 2 months,
right.
you might be going, him or Ober.
Right.
Or,
yes.
you know, and
right.
obviously if injuries
right.
happen, then you want him as a backup
right.
plan there. But I would say he fits that description. Whereas Flaherty, it's, well, he's in your playoff rotation
right.
no matter
right.
what.
And basically all the rest of the names we're going to talk about probably aren't.
Right. They're below that level.
But before we do that, before we get to the last part, let's cover our last sponsor. Sponsor is BetterHelp. BetterHelp, H-E-L-P. BetterHelp is a service that we value because if you are if you make the big decision that you are ready to get some therapy, the last thing you need is all the logistics that are between you and that actual therapy.
Yeah. BetterHelp can set you up with a real licensed therapist, typically within days as opposed to weeks.
Right.
And they can tailor it to whatever you're comfortable with. So if you want to do a video call, you can set that up. If you're like, I don't want to be on camera, you can do a phone call. Right. If you're like me and you hate phone calls, you can just do a live chat where you're typing with a person. They can figure out what is tailored to you, set you up with a licensed therapist that can work with you on whatever issue you're looking to.
And if you're thinking about maybe therapy, why not just give it a try? Like, it's something you can try for a little bit. It's a lot less commitment on your part than having to seek out somebody in person. So
stop comparing and start focusing with BetterHelp. For our listeners, you visit BetterHelp.com/Gleeman and you will get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, H-E-L-P, BetterHelp.com/Gleeman. Okay, so just a couple more pitching names. I mean, it dries up really in a hurry.
Yeah, right.
For rentals. I mean, you're limiting the market when you're only talking about rentals versus Skubal and Crochet, and there's all kinds of guys that are. Here's interesting. The Royce Lewis is officially back. They optioned Jair Camargo. No official
Miranda. Yeah.
So I wonder if they'll wait a day on that. I don't know.
I thought he was in Detroit.
I believe he took the same flight as Doe to Detroit. So we'll see. But they could wait to see how he looks pre-game or something like that. There's no. You can do it up to the game.
Well, they might not want to play 3 days in a row either. Like you played Wednesday and Thursday.
Maybe.
Yeah.
So these next names are not going to be impressive names. These are rentals. These are
right.
These are true just sort of placeholder guys for Paddock. These are ways to avoid going with Festa, Varland, Matthews, etc. before you might think they're ready or trustable or whatever. Frankie Montas, who 3 years ago or 2 years ago would have been very exciting.
Yeah.
But he's had shoulder surgery since then, and he's been pretty mediocre for the Reds. But they're certainly sellers for impending free agents. He's owed like $4 or $5 million for the rest of the season. Maybe you think you can.
I thought it was like $6-7 million for the rest of the season. Wasn't he a $20 million contract?
No, 15.
Okay, all right.
Like that. Might have some option money for next year, but Lorenzen, who we mentioned, who's truly just I think a fifth starter, very bad secondary numbers despite a good looking ERA. James Paxton, who just got DFA'd by the Dodgers, who again like Montas. 3, 4, 5 years ago, that would have been very exciting. But he's had a lot of injuries, and I think he's like in his late 30s now. The Dodgers DFA'd him like almost exactly 10 days before the deadline. And when you get DFA'd, they have a window to trade you, release you, or put you on waivers. Right. And so, yes, he's been DFA'd and dropped from their 40-man roster, but that doesn't preclude them from making a trade. But obviously, the return would be pretty minimal. I think they've paid off almost all of his incentives in his contract, if I remember correctly. And he's owed like $2 million for the rest of the season. Okay. So he's a lefty. He used to be very good. Strikeouts are way down. He's nearing the end of the line. A couple other names here. Alex Cobb, who was an all-star last year, for the Giants, but is currently rehabbing, but he's very close to being activated. I will say that they were interested in Alex Cobb as a free agent a few years ago.
Yeah.
There's the Tampa connection, which Baldelli coached him in Tampa, but he's mid-30s, coming off injury. But again, he was an all-star last year.
And I mean, it's not like they can't be looking at rehab starts. Like they could be scouting.
You get the same data on all that.
That's right.
The Giants are definitely selling. Kyle Hendricks, who, again, a few years ago would have been a interesting name. The Cubs are certainly selling.
Yeah.
He's a guy who, even at his best, was throwing 88 miles an hour. Now he's throwing like 85 miles an hour. He's had some pretty bad numbers, but he's a veteran. I'll just mention that name. And then one more, a lefty, Marco Gonzalez with the Pirates, who's playing out his last year. He's been banged up, but he's had like a half dozen pretty good starts for the Pirates, and they're certainly, I'm assuming, selling.
Are they?
I mean, I don't know. Maybe not. They have some good young pitching. Maybe they go out and try to add some bats. But so those are the other names. Outside the box, you mentioned Eric Fedde, and I completely agree with you that he's a good target. I just can't see them adding $7.5 million.
I just think that he strikes as the kind of they could take that on and then figure out what they're going to do in the offseason to clear.
They got a lot of figure out what they do in the offseason already.
Yeah, a little bit.
I also am not certain the White Sox will trade with them. It's been 12 years or something since the White Sox traded with them.
That's a fair point.
I've heard some rumors about that the White Sox will not trade with them.
Oh, that's just sort of
not
policy.
Just the Twins, just like
anybody in the AL Central.
Coming from like Ryan Storff.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, coming from ownership, right?
But Fedde would be if you just wipe away the context of the Twins' payroll situation and all that, he would be an ideal get. I mentioned Reed Detmers, who would be sort of a reclamation project, but first round pick. I know they liked him when he was coming out of the draft. They didn't get a chance to pick him because he went before they picked. But lefty, throws hard. Has had some real good stretches with the Angels, but was poor this year, and the Angels demoted him to AAA. Here's what I'll say. You will never go broke betting against the Angels' player development.
Sure.
So if there's one team where you go, well, this pitcher, we thought he was good. He's been pretty bad. He is on the Angels, though. So maybe we could get him here and get him back on track. Right. I think you make 10 bets like that on the Angels. The Rockies are another team that I would sort of say you want to make a habit of plucking players away from them. So I think he could, he's the guy who's making the minimum, has 3 years of arbitration left. It's going to be relatively costly, I guess, because he's a former first-round pick. He's still pretty young. He had a decent year last year. But if you could get him on track, not only could he be a multi-year guy for you, but he'd be pretty cheap next year, too.
Sure.
And then one other name, I don't think this will happen, but Blake Snell, who is technically on a 1-year deal. And here's what's interesting about the 1-year deal. It's, I believe, a $30 million 1-year deal.
Right.
Half of it was paid immediately as a signing bonus.
Oh, really?
So his actual monthly salary.
So we only $5 million for this year.
But here's the problem with Blake Snell. And the Twins just saw firsthand how effective he can be when healthy.
Correct.
He's missed most of this year with injuries. But he shut them out for 7 innings, right? He took a no-hitter into the 6th inning or something like that against them on the last road trip. He has a player option for $30 million next year.
Right.
So if he gets hurt down the stretch or pitches poorly down the stretch.
And he's already been hurt and been out. Right.
And his free agent situation is why he was in this weird contract to begin with. They didn't get the offers they wanted as a free agent coming off a Cy Young year.
Right.
Well, the Twins sure as hell can't take on $30 million in salary for next year.
Right.
They would either have to be very confident that he would not exercise that player option, or that if he does, they could move it at sort of a cost-neutral situation. If he was truly on a 1-year deal, and it was really only $15 million, owed about $5 million for the final 2 months, he might be near the top of this list. I might put him second to Flaherty. I'd probably put him above Kikuchi because we've seen.
Of course.
Maybe he's healthy, maybe he's not, but for 2 months, he can be an impact guy for you.
I mean,
but the contract situation, I think that makes that untenable for the Twins in particular. So we'll see. That's the starting.
There's an incredible upside and an incredible downside risk there. If he's really good for these last 2-3 months, he may not exercise that. $30 million
My expectation
piece,
is that if he's healthy and even reasonably effective, he would decline his option and go try to get a multi-year deal.
Right. That's right.
But the Twins you cannot risk that because $30 million added onto their payroll, if it's unmovable,
Right.
they're screwed.
Right.
I mean, they would have to trade away legitimate
Right.
players to make that happen. If the rental market is not all they're looking at on starters, then there are a bunch of other names. But
And it's some really high-end ones.
well,
but
yeah, sure. But I don't think that's going to happen.
I
But
agree.
I do think the rental market will be where they're primarily looking. The other, like I guess, second most obvious spot that they could upgrade, I would say, and I guess you could maybe argue, just in terms of an upgrade, you do have possibly Paddock coming back. You do have Varland. You do have Matthews. You do have Festa. You could roll with that. When you're looking at the bullpen, they just added Stewart back.
Yeah.
I mean, you look at
maybe Topa coming back.
right. You have Duran, Jack, Stewart, Alcala, Sands, Stallmont plus Topa, maybe Varland, maybe
Varland.
Paddock for that matter,
That's right,
or
yep.
Festa, Matthews. You got plenty of right-handed relievers. I mean, obviously you got to
Right.
keep those guys healthy. I'm not saying it's the greatest collection ever, but I don't think that's a need.
You're right.
However, you flip to the left side.
And
You know,
nothing has worked out. quite the way
Okert
they
has been mediocre. If you're feeling all right, if you're feeling
wanted.
nice,
Right. He's been really good versus lefties.
He's been good against lefties. He's been
Right.
very bad against righties, and he's been very bad when put in spots that matter. Like when the game is on the line, he has really struggled. Not necessarily predictive, but a reason why you maybe wouldn't have lots of confidence in him. Caleb Thielbar has pitched better of late, but certainly does not look like he's going to be able to put himself back in a position where you would
Right.
trust him in the playoffs or even a big role down the stretch. He's also 38 years old. And then Cody Funderburg's injured and didn't really do much to make you trust him either. I mean, I still think he's a decent reliever.
Yeah.
But
He's
unclear
got
when
a
he's going to
career,
be
but
back.
right now he's injured, so it doesn't really matter. Right.
So the question then is, do you need a left-handed reliever? And all things being equal, you would love to have one of your 3 or 4 best
Sure.
relievers be a lefty.
Yes.
That'd be great. But
There are certainly times where you want a good left-handed
Absolutely.
reliever. Right.
as we saw against Houston in the playoffs last year with Alvarez and Tucker hitting in the middle of that lineup, it doesn't necessarily do you any good to go, oh, we'll bring in a lefty to face these guys if the lefty is worse than all your righties. Yes, it's a matchup. And yes, big picture, those guys are going to be at least slightly worse, if not significantly worse, lefty on lefty than they are feasting on righties. But if the lefty involved is your 8th best reliever, you're still bringing in a guy who's not particularly good.
Right.
And so the idea of getting into a playoff series and bringing in Okert to face 2 of the best hitters in the league or something, or as we saw last year, Thielbar, same thing, that's not that appealing to me. So the question then becomes, can you just roll with a bullpen where your top 5 or 6 guys are all righties? And a lot of those righties can get lefties out. It's not like they have extreme splits. Some of them
Sure.
are quite good against lefties.
Right.
But then it raises the bar for a possible acquisition of a lefty because it's not just as simple as, is this guy better than a 38-year-old Thielbar or better than Okert? There are quite a few guys who fit that description. It then becomes, if it's the 7th inning or the 8th inning of a playoff game, and it's a tie game, or we got a 1-run lead, and a great left-handed hitter's up, or maybe 2 out of the next 3 batters are left-handed hitters, have we added a lefty who's good enough that you would want them in that spot as opposed to just putting Griffin Jackson
That's right.
or Stewart in or Duran in or even Sands or Alcala or whatever?
Where would you put Puck? Puck would qualify for
Yeah,
that,
I mean,
right?
Puck's good. But
I mean, I'm just raising a name because he did just get traded last night, right?
Yeah.
They ended up giving up, 2 mid-tier prospects, I think, basically back. One,
I don't know. The one guy has a 1,100 OPS at AAA as a 21-year-old. He wasn't that good of a prospect coming into the season, but he's
Yeah.
one of those riser
he's
prospect.
got some heat.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's tricky because it's like, yeah, you'd like a lefty, but just the left-handedness alone,
Sure.
I think
It's
can
gotta
get
be
you into some problem areas if you're relying on that, as we saw last
Right.
year.
That's right.
So, speaking of the Marlins, they traded Puck, but their closer is Tanner Scott, who
Right.
was a good lefty for the Orioles, has been now in Miami for 2 or 3 years. Massive strikeout numbers, like 11, 12, 13 strikeouts per 90s, upper 90s fastball. no clue where the ball's going.
Yeah, exactly. That's
walking,
it, yeah.
5 or 6 guys, but
He's had a good year.
oh, he's got a
He's had in part because his walk rate is down.
a little bit, but not that much. He's still walking over 5 guys per 9, I think. But I mean, he's been a dominant late inning guy with a 2-something ERA, and this year a 1-something ERA for quite a while. The nice thing about him, I would say, is he's a pure rental, 2 months.
Yeah.
His team is clearly selling. His team also may not be the brightest bulbs. We'll see. They're under different management now. Amazing stuff in that, he'd probably be right up there with Jackson Stewart as second to Duran in terms. I mean, he's 97 with a fastball, great slider as a lefty. It's impressive, and huge strikeout rate, which you want, bad control, which you don't want in a late inning role, but also pretty neutral splits, which is to say he dominant when he's throwing strikes. He's dominant against lefties, but also righties. Okay. I think the last 2 years, righties are hitting like 150 off him or something like that. So he would have a chance to be not just we brought this guy in to face lefties, but he could just pitch the 8th inning or something like that. Right. So he's interesting, but also he's very clearly the top rental reliever and the top overall left-handed reliever on the market, which is to say they're not going to be able to just send them their 15th best prospect for him. Right. So you got to wait. I mean, a reliever for 2 months, it's like 15 innings maybe. Yeah. How much you want to give up for that?
I mean, they can have 2 bad innings.
Right.
And
if you have one bad game, it's like, well, now we're hoping
your WPA is already shot for your new team. Right.
So I would put him at the top of the list. I would have liked Puck. I thought that would have made sense. He's got 2 years of team control remaining, but that's off the table now. Some other rentals to keep in mind: Andrew Chafin from the Tigers, who we've seen a lot over the years. Justin Wilson from the Reds, who's like in his mid-30s. He's just sort of a typical lefty reliever. Aroldis Chapman from the Pirates, who seemingly gets traded to a contender every year. Right. Still getting a lot of strikeouts, still throwing high 90s, walking a million guys, but we've seen that work in the playoffs for him quite a bit. And then non-rentals, because I don't with relievers and especially mid-level relievers,
you're talking $2 or $3 million a lot of times.
Yeah, and also I don't know that the years of control has that much value, because I think a lot of teams rightly think, I don't know that this reliever is going to be anything in 3 years. Yeah, how many relievers have a 5-year run or whatever? Just some random names so people can say, hey, they mentioned them. Another Marlins guy, Andrew Nardi, who's a lefty, middle of the road, but again, because Tanner Scott is their closer and they had Puck in the bullpen, he gets kind of pushed down leverage-wise.
I mean, that's why we got Oker, too.
Yeah, from Miami. That's right. That's part of why they traded him.
A left-handed reliever.
Joe Manaply from the Diamondbacks. Probably saw him in the playoffs last year. Sam Moll is a guy from Cincinnati. Robert Garcia is a guy from the Nationals. Tanner Banks is a guy from the White Sox who has pitched against the Twins a few times this year. Look, these are not world beaters by any means. I would put these guys at sort of the Okert level. So then it's just a question of do we slightly prefer this guy to Okert?
Do we think we got something special with this guy, something we can add to?
Or do we think they're clearly better than Theobar at this age or Funderburk, and we could have sort of 2 Okerts at least to choose from? But I guess with the left-hander reliever front, I would lean more towards quality or not. I don't think
they've got to be a clear high leverage arm that happens to be left-handed,
or just clearly better than Okert. I think is a decent baseline for, and obviously it's subjective, whatever you personally think about Okert. But I'm not saying Okert is a major league reliever. He's just not a guy, and he can get lefties.
Yes,
although the little cameo he made against the Phillies lefties didn't go that well. But
just Schwarber.
Yeah, but to me, it does you no good really. Unless you feel like you just need a little bullpen depth and it doesn't matter that they're a lefty down the stretch. But I would only be adding a guy that you would feel, we talk about Houston, but there are other playoff teams, obviously, with lefty hitters. If you can't envision yourself bringing them in the 6th or 7th inning to face a couple of lefty hitters, or you're going to be like, let's cross our fingers on that, then don't trade for them. Or at least don't trade any sort of prospect capital for them. So that's kind of where I would be on the lefty reliever front. Lineup-wise, I really don't know what – I mean, look, I've been saying they should add a right-handed hitting outfielder for about 30 years now.
Right,
It's clear they don't agree that that's a priority.
Yeah.
But to me, if you have Kepler, Larnach, Wallner, those are your corner outfield kind of and DH mix. You want someone to platoon with them. Now, that's a role that Margot has been filling.
Yeah.
But
and he's pretty good when he's not pinch hitting.
The people keep saying that. He's slugging 380 when he starts games. It's not exactly, lighting the world on fire. But it's all relative. He's 0 for 25 as a pinch hitter, Manuel Miranda.
I know.
Which the amazing thing is,
we've got a story on it in Twins Daily.
He leads the majors in pinch hitting appearances. He's
Yes.
the most used pinch hitter in the world. And he's 0 for 25. Now, he does have like 3 walks or something like that. So give him big credit for that. That's hard to do because he's only struck out like 5 times. He's putting the ball in play. So the question there, similar to the left-handed reliever question is, I do think they should be at least in the market for a right-handed hitting corner outfielder. But it does you no good if the guy is not clearly better than Manuel Margot.
Right. That's right.
Or for that matter, Austin Martin.
Right.
I would say stylistically, I'd like a power hitter in that role, someone that can, as a bat off the bench.
Sure.
I mean, it's not hard to go better than 0 for 25, but just, I don't know that that's predictive necessarily,
right, yes.
but I'd like somebody who could thump a homer as opposed to trying to hit a single somewhere. That's not the worst thing.
Kyle Farmer's coming off the IL at some point.
Well, he's not going to play the outfield, first of all.
I know.
But also...
he'll thump a homer versus a lefty.
Will he? When was that? Last time you saw that? Sorry, Kyle. But Margot has been decent overall of late after a bad start when not used as a pinch hitter.
Uh-huh.
But I don't know that they really value that. And here's the other thing. If Correa and Lewis and Miranda are back and the other guys stay healthy, their lineup against lefties doesn't necessarily need another bat.
Right.
I'm not saying that would hurt.
Sure.
But they have 7 or 8 good right-handed hitters if you include the switch hitters like Santana and Castro. Their lineup against lefties, if everyone's healthy, they would love to see lefties in the playoffs.
Yes.
Like Buxton, Correa, Miranda, Santana, Lewis, Castro. It's just Jeffers on and on. They would love to see that matchup in the playoffs. And so do you really need to upgrade Margot with a slightly better guy who might be batting 7th or 8th in that lineup? Now, I would argue that that spot is going to matter. Here's the thing. If you get into a playoff series and you didn't upgrade from Manuel Margot, Manuel Margot is going to come up as a pinch hitter, as a starting player, as a defensive replacement. You're going to either...
And we'll all eat crow.
Right. It could work out great for you. He could come up through with
That's
a...
right.
He could be the new... I'm trying to think of a hero. He could be the new... we haven't had many playoff heroes in the last 20 years.
Pitch-hitting hero. Randy Bush?
Okay, yeah, 30 years ago. Sheen Larkin.
There you go.
You get the idea. So, but here are some names that I guess I would at least, make calls on, looking for a right-handed hitting corner outfielder. Basically, someone better than Margot, or at least stylistically different than Margot. Taylor Ward from the Angels crushes lefties. Decent enough against righties that he's startable there if you need to, but legitimately destroys lefties pretty regularly. But he's got 2 years of team control beyond this. I don't know if that matters because he's making like $4.5 million. I don't know that anybody's going to keep him for $7 million,
right.
$10 million.
Yeah.
But the Angels are certainly selling, obviously, every year. Lane Thomas, who was a hot commodity this time last year, and the Nationals, to our surprise, I remember last year, didn't trade him because they thought, and then he has lost 100 points of OPS and all that. But still a decent fourth outfielder who can hit some lefties. Randall Grichuk, who I feel like we've talked about every year for 5 years, is still hitting lefties pretty well.
Is he with the Rockies now? Where is he now?
Arizona.
Okay.
Although not clear Arizona's selling at this point.
Yeah, I don't think they are.
Connor Joe is the guy we talked about last year from the Pirates, who's still filling that role. Tommy Pham, if you want to shake up the clubhouse a little bit, he can certainly hit lefties and hit people. So that's an option. Mark Canha from the Tigers hasn't hit much this year, but is a right-handed veteran bat. And then I'll toss in another Angels guy, Joe Adell. You look at his overall numbers every year, it's bad. He used to be an elite prospect, but he has not hit. He's a 190 career hitter. You might go, well, why? First of all, he's still young, has power, good athlete, minimum salaried. And if you look at the splits, he's hit lefties pretty decent. Okay. He has power against lefties. Against righties, I don't want to go anywhere near him. So those are some names, but it's not clear to me that they prioritize that in general, and it's not even necessarily clear to me that I would prioritize it given their other situation. Because a lot of these, the two ways that the and then we'll shut up here. But two ways I'll shut up here. There's two ways that the money situation really hurts them. One is if they're not willing, from an ownership perspective, to take on at least $3 to $5 million to trade for a, let's say, starting pitcher. Even a guy making $10 million this year, they'd have to take on $3 million. That requires either not being able to acquire that guy in general, or you have to convince the selling team to eat that salary, and usually you have to pay more in terms of prospect.
Give up some prospects.
So that hurts. You're giving away talent simply because you won't spend the money. But another way it hurts is a lot of these guys, whether it's the right-handed hitting, corner outfielders, guys, Tommy Pham or whatever, or the left-handed relievers that we were talking about, just sort of these average guys who are, kind of placeholder guys.
Sure.
A lot of those guys get traded just for the salary relief. You send them your 50th ranked prospect, some rookie ball pitcher, as a lottery ticket.
The other team doesn't have to pay them $1.5 million or $2 million.
The Twins aren't going to be in a position where they're going to be able to take on $2 million for a role player or something. I don't think. Yeah. And so that takes that type of trade, which are the easiest type of trade to make. It's you have a valuable role player on a terrible team. You would prefer not to pay him $2 million down the stretch. We'll take the $2 million and we'll send you some prospect that has a 1% chance of doing anything. But if that's off the window, then you're actually, if you trade for one of these average guys and you're asking the team to eat that $2 million, well, what's in it for them other than you have to send them a decent prospect? So those are the aspects of this that I think kind of suck. What I will say about the prospect, we actually went through my top 20 list on the Patreon a couple episodes ago.
Yes,
if you want more on each prospect. But they have the firepower in terms of a farm system to go out and trade for anybody they want to trade for. I'm talking. If they want to trade for Skubal and Crochet and guys like that, they absolutely. You will not find many better trios of prospect than Jenkins, Lee, and Rodriguez, and their top six of those three plus Festa, Zebby Matthews, and Luke Keeschel are all top 100 prospects. I mean, you will not find a better top six than that. And I would say even their 7 to 15, 18 range, they have enough depth and quality to put together packages for basically any level of veteran they want.
And, I mean, you take a look at, say, the Rosarina deal yesterday.
Yeah.
I mean, he ends up going for two, I think in the latest, Mariners' 14th and 15th best overall prospects is what got a Rosarina done. And that is, they've got a deep farm system. They've got their 14th and 15th best prospects are pretty good. But
the one guy's
feel
definitely
like
not 14th best. I mean, it depends what ranking.
Baseball America in their midseason one had them as their 14th and 15th organization.
Yeah, except last night, their editor said they were putting it out the update today.
Oh, okay.
He's 5th or something. But
anyway, well, maybe that's
we don't know these guys. So we're just going off rankings.
Maybe these guys were mid-teen prospects that have a lot of steam. One of the things we talk about is that what you end up seeing going on a lot of these trade deadline deals is a guy who was the 13th overall prospect, but now he's the 6th or the 5th because he's had a really good year at AA, something like that.
I mean, we saw that with the Twins trading away Steer and Encarnacion Strand, where both those guys were in the teens coming into the season, and they were having breakout years because that's who's going to impress scouts who are looking.
That's exactly right.
They don't the preseason prospect rankings. There's it's like preseason college football ranking. By the 8th game of the season, well, who cares where you were ranked? 3 months ago. If you've gone 3 and 5 since then, you're out of the ranking.
Well,
so it's similar to that. But they have the ability to go out and get someone. And then the other thing I'll say is, again, we talked more about this on the Patreon, Patreon and patreon.com/Gleeman. They have some non-prospects who are young-ish and minimum salaried and under team control that a rebuilding or selling team would find valuable, similar to a prospect, which is, Julian, Wallner, Larnick, maybe even Kirilloff. You have some salary matching components with Farmer, Margot, Thielbar, guys like that, where the guys are making $2 million still for the rest of the season. So that's something to watch too. And then they also have some not top prospects, but guys who are basically major league ready in Severino, Camargo, Hellman, Kersey at AAA. Now, you're not going to be able to trade any. Those guys are kind of elderly for prospects, but they're basically like on the border of AAA and majors.
Right, that's right.
There are going to be some teams, whether for a left-handed reliever or backup outfielder, they go, all right, give us Severino. We can plug him in as our starting first baseman or whatever.
That's
It's
right.
like those are the type of deals.
We won't have to pay him. We'll pay him minimum salary for the next
Right.
3-4 years. He'll
He
be
might
holding
be a
down our first baseman.
Decent regular for cheap.
That's right. Yep.
So that's something.
And
to watch
maybe
too.
he's better than that. Now we can flip him in 3 years.
Well, yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
I think the payroll and ownership aspect handcuffs them. I would love to be wrong. I mean, I will give them credit if they bring on $5 million in trade salary and don't cause a team to eat it, and I will be the first one writing and talking about, okay, that's at least a step in the right direction. That's a good faith effort. That's how they should be doing it. Doesn't take away what they did during the offseason, but it's at least a step back towards, running a team like I think most fans would like a team to be run. But I'm just so skeptical of that. I think that does limit them. But at the same time, they are fortunate in that there aren't gaping holes to fill. I mean, think of some of these
Yes,
deadlines
for sure.
over the last decade
Oh,
where
yeah.
we've talked about where it's like they need 2 starters
Yeah.
and a late inning reliever, and they don't have a third baseman.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay,
Well, we should also take a look. 2 years ago, they ended up making a bunch of big swings for big. They missed the postseason as a result.
Yeah.
And then last year they made nothing. We were furious at the trade deadline. They ended up winning a couple postseason games. So
yes, I mean, being handcuffed
is it crap?
can keep you out of trouble
Right.
too.
Yeah, that's
It
right.
can keep you from making a Tyler Mahle trade
That's
or
right.
a Jorge Lopez
that's right.
trade. There's less room to get hurt in a rental trade.
Sure, of course.
I guess. And then the last thing they released, this is just a random note.
Oh yeah,
They released
Jackson.
Jay Jackson from
Yeah.
AAA. So it was weird because
he got
the second time he'd been dropped from the 40-man roster, cleared waivers, unclaimed, and was sent to AAA. The first time he made 3 appearances for them
Right.
and then got called back up and pitched poorly for a week and then got redropped and sent back down. This time he never pitched for the
he
Saints.
never pitched for the Saints.
They
right?
put him on the inactive list. They
Huh.
basically told him, you can take a leave here.
Okay.
I don't think he wanted to pitch at AAA anymore. So clearly they couldn't find a taker for him,
right.
or they
Or his agent couldn't find a taker.
right, or they
Right,
didn't
yeah.
envision him getting another opportunity, which I think is correct given how he looked
Right.
and his age. So they just released him. I mean, they were on the hook for the money anyway. It's like $1.5 million. So I won't be shocked, I guess, if he just signs a minor league deal somewhere and tries to get back to the majors in August or September. But that is that's a low wattage move that I think probably happened because they just didn't have money to spend. And some of those worked out well. Carlos Santana's worked out well.
Yeah.
I don't think they would have
Sure.
targeted Carlos Santana if they
I
had more
think you're
money.
right. Yeah.
But Jay Jackson for $1.5 million was they were hoping to squeeze one good year out of an aging reliever and didn't really get it. But okay, so
Monday, Patreon.
we'll be talking about the Tiger series. We'll be hopefully talking about some injury returns.
Maybe analyzing the trade market as some other deals go down and we get a better sense of how things
Or we
are shaking
might be
out.
doing an emergency
Or we might be
episode.
doing an emergency podcast. We break out the emergency podcast.
Whatever happens, it will be exclusively for our Patreon subscribers.
Yes.
There will not be a Friday show next week to recap the deadline.
Yes.
So if you want to hear us react to deadline moves or non-moves,
Yeah.
Monday and Wednesday at minimum,
Yes.
and then any emergency in the moment
Potentially
deals
this
that
weekend.
happen.
Sure.
Patreon, patreon.com/Gleeman. If you join right now and just go through the trade deadline, it will cost you probably $2, maybe $3.
Maybe. Yeah.
And you will get multiple episodes of 90-plus minutes of commercial-free Twins talk. I suspect if you're still listening to this episode right now, you will enjoy it. So we would love to have you join us.
And to keep this one free, I want to just thank our sponsors, Dan Hodgen, Game Time, BetterHelp, Harry's, and special thank you to Blackstack Brewing, been our presenting sponsor, and you can check out their Where to Buy page on their website. Find out where you can buy their beer and THC products near you. And we will talk to you
Hopefully Monday on
hopefully
the Patreon.
Monday on the Patreon. Otherwise, we'll talk to you in 2 weeks.
Gleeman